I want to talk about the mystical angel who probably at one time was a prophet. But before I do that, we're going to talk about a character called Sandalphon. Now, most of you have no idea who he is, but in 1846, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, as part of his anthology of poems called The Belfry of Bruce and other poems, wrote an interesting poem called Sandalphon. Now, the composition is about 9 stanzas long, and it begins, "Have you read in the Talmud of old, in the legends of the rabbins have told, of the limitless realms of the air, have you read it, the marvelous story of Sandalphon, the angel of glory, Sandalphon, the angel of prayer." So tonight I want to talk about Sandalphon. Now, last week, if you were here, you know that we were talking last week about Metatron. So Metatron was one of the angels. It was he and Sandalphon basically are called the pillars of the cosmos. They're very, very much alike. In fact, each one of them has a Greek name. Metatron is the Greek name because, according to the Jewish understanding, we are not supposed to know the names of their Hebrew, because if we do, we might be able to control them. So Metatron is from the Greek, and so is Sandalphon. Sandalphon actually means, in Greek, it actually means co-brother. So Sandalphon was the co-brother of Metatron. They were basically, if we would use it terms today, we'd simply call them twin angels. Each had a basic role to play in the universe or in this cosmos. I talked last week about Metatron is seen as the heavenly scribe. And as I discussed last week, Metatron is the prince of the presence, the highest angel being, often acting as a heavenly scribe and a divine mediator. He is identified with Yesod, which is the Hebrew word for secrets. And he's also identified with Keter, which is the crown or the pure thought, linking him to the divine transmission of knowledge. Now, Yesod and Keter are part of the mystical language called Kabbalah. And so there's going to be things that I'm going to talk about that may not fit you right now, but somewhere, if you stick with it, you will pick up a lot of this language. Metatron reads divine decrees. He writes them down. He oversees the execution of these decrees by God. Sandalphon, on the other hand, we're going to learn he's the angel of earthly elevations. His kingdom seems to be divided between two. Sandalphon is associated with the lower realms, really, and he's often described as an angel who stands at the foot of the Merkava, or the divine chariot, if you've read Ezekiel chapter 1. He's linked to Malkut, which is also called kingdom. It's the lowest of the Sephirah. The meaning he receives in prayers from all of us, because as we pray, the prayers, as they understand, go to Jerusalem and up through the shaft all the way into the divine heavenlies. And so Sandalphon collects the prayers and he sends them up, and we'll talk more about that later. Now, some Midrashic and Kabbalistic sources claim that Sandalphon has another name, and they say his name is Ophan. Now, again, if you do Ezekiel chapter 1, you find out that the word Ophan means a wheel. He was the wheel on the chariot. Now, this refers to the ancient people's identification of him as a living creature, one of the spiritual wheels of God, of Ezekiel's vision. Now, some Midrashic and Kabbalistic sources claim Sandalphon was originally the prophet Elijah, who ascended bodily into heaven and, like Enoch, became an angelic being. Now, if Metatron is the scribe who sends decrees downward, Sandalphon is the intercessor who sends human prayers upward. So they each have a function, and their functions pretty much match one another. Sandalphon represents a rare blend of humanity and divinity, especially if he really was Enoch or if he was Elijah. Identified by many as the prophet turned angel, who still retains a deep connection to his once earthly existence. Unlike most angels who operate entirely in the celestial sphere, Sandalphon is deeply involved in human prayer. He's involved in nature, and he's involved in this material world. He is divinely in his divine presence is part of the creation story. Now, he's not listed in the Bible. In fact, you'll find nowhere where you'll find him listed. In fact, there are very few places where you can go to find his name at all, unless you go to the Kabbalistic works or the mystery works. Sandalphon is said to be one of the oldest angel figures of the Merkava, of the chariot of mystery. Now, there's a thing called a beretta. A beretta designates a tradition in the oral Torah, and it's of rabbinical Judaism, and that it is incorporated into the Mishnah, into the laws. Beretta thus refers to teaching outside of the 6 orders of the Mishnah. Now, the Mishnah is basically composed of 613 laws that are divided into 6 categories. So this is outside all of that. Now, at the beginning of the 2nd century, we find writings such as the Ophan, the chariot wheel, mentioned in Ezekiel 1, verse 16, in which they call this character Sandalphon. So he's an angel who stands on the earth, and according to the legends and the stories, his head reaches into the Hayot. The Hayot are the animals that occupy the chariot that surround God. Now, that would make them extremely tall, but the concept of being huge is the idea, the fact that he is aware of. That's the most important part. He is truly taller than everything else around it. But again, he binds himself to the Creator. He is one with the Creator, which is what we all strive to try to become. Now, this whole idea comes from the book, the Talmud, called Haggadah 13b. Now, the angel Hardanel led Moses into heaven until he reached the fiery Sandalphon, who was standing next to God. Here we remained standing because he feared the fire that was there, because Sandalphon was on fire. Moses himself was afraid at the sight of it. So that God placed himself before it for his protection. The crowns that Sandalphon binds to God's head are actually symbols of praise from the different angels as they praise him each and every day. Now, some sources describe Sandalphon as being they emphasize the fact that he is between heaven and earth. His role includes being the leader of the angelic choirs. Do you remember the story of Jacob after fighting with the archangel, or the angel that matches up with Esau? He defeated that angel, and the angel wanted to be released, but Jacob wouldn't release him until he gave him a blessing. That's back in Genesis chapter 32. And so his job after he left there was to become a part of that choir. He needed to leave. So Sandalphon basically is responsible for that music that is heard each and every hour up in heaven. Now, Sandalphon is also said to rule one of the 7 levels of heaven. I don't know if you remember our study in the book of Isaiah, when we talked about the fact that the king of Tyre built for himself 7 glass palaces in the middle of the Mediterranean. And on each level was to represent one of the levels of heaven. And then again, the king of Tyre lived his throne was on the 7th level. Well, there's a controversy as to which level Sandalphon is actually on. Now, there are Christian texts and there are Jewish texts. Both of them come from the book of Enoch. And we're told that Sandalphon rules over the third one. Islam says that he rules over the fourth heaven. Now, the Zohar says he rules over the seventh heaven. So each of them has their own idea of where he is actually coming from. But we need to understand that he rules to the divine. Sandalphon may guide souls who ascend from the material realm when we pass or when we are able to cross over, which is the level of Malkut, back through the highest Sephirot, untimely or ultimately reuniting with the divine presence. He's also the intercessor of prayers. In Jewish mysticism, Sandalphon is known as the angel who delivers prayers from earth to God, meaning he facilitates communication between the lower and the upper worlds. Now, part of those prayers are woven together, are reinterpreted in some cases, so that they tend to make sense, because sometimes we don't know what to pray or how to pray. And Sandalphon is supposedly the one who actually helps in our prayers. And so our prayers are all woven together that day and provided to God for a crown. There's also he's also called a spiritual guardian. He's a transition, or he's the gatekeeper between the lower world and the upper world. And he also deals with what we call the tree of life, which is potentially, it's the idea of the boundlessness. I've shown this before, but one of the things that we should learn or should begin to understand is that there are 10 levels that are in each and every one of the four worlds. Let me explain the four worlds for a second. There are four worlds, and actually there's five, but four worlds that we know of that we can be a part of. The first world is the world called Atzilut. That's the world of oneness. Everything is one. When we finally make it to the world to come, when we make it to the end of days in the world to come, we will all become one with God. His mind will be our mind. Our mind will be his mind. That's where we're headed. But right now we're divided. In fact, we're divided in such a way that the next level is called the level of Beriah. Beriah means the world of creation, or the throne room. It talks about the fact of how Genesis and all of the other understandings of creation are laid out. But again, that means that things are separated. Then comes what we call the world of formation. That's the world of Yetzirah. And finally, the world that we now live in right here on this planet is called the world of Asiya, the world of action. We act out our belief system. Now, the last thing that he's responsible for is mystical. He takes our understandings and transmits them to us to enlighten us as to our function, what we should be doing. Sometimes you might call it the hints that are going on in your head. What made me think that I needed to do that? Or an accident happened and now I'm in the middle of this. It's because of the fact of this ascent that we're making. We're always trying to move towards God. Now, he's also associated with what we call Malkut. Malkut, again, is the bottom level. That's the world that we live in, the world of action. So he presides over this world. And from this world to the next world, he's the gatekeeper. He's the one that's responsible for allowing us to move. There's a story that I've told multiple times about Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva left our world and walked into the world of creation. So he walked through the world of Yetzirah into the world of creation. And in doing so, he came closest to God. He wasn't with God, but he came as close as you could get. Now, that whole process involved him being allowed to get there. So what allows somebody to move from here to there? And that's what I'm going to be talking about later on when we get into Moses and we get into the story of Elijah going up to heaven. Now, as I shared before, Sandalphon in Kabbalah is often associated with kingdom, with Malkut, physical reality. Malkut is the Jewish thought is linked to the idea of God's presence called Shekinah, or his divine presence, his feminine side. Further referring to Sandalphon's connection to the earthly realm. Now, his presence at this level serves as a bridge between what we call the physical world and the spiritual world. He helps our prayers ascend. That's what his function is. Sandalphon is also known for his power and his strength. He is said to join the angelic armies that Archangel Michael leads to fight Satan and his evil forces in the spiritual world. We see this again if you were going through the book of Daniel. We run into the time when Gabriel tried to reach Daniel to explain to him what was going on or what the future held. But he couldn't get there because he was blocked by the angel called the angel of Persia, or the prince of Persia. Michael, with the help of Sandalphon, was allowed to reach down, and Gabriel could get through and meet with Daniel. That's in the chapter 7, 8, 8. So in Jewish astrology, going even deeper, Sandalphon is the angel in charge of our planet, because each planet has its own angel in charge of it. Each star has its own angel in charge of it. Each blade of grass has an angel which is in charge of it. Everything has something. I understand, and you probably already know this, the fact that we can't even imagine how many angels are even in the room that we're in right now, or your room where you were at. The angels are everywhere, and they're for your protection. Now, in his continuous role as Elijah, Sandalphon is often finding himself on this earth because he is responsible for witnessing the circumcision of Jewish boys. Now, one of his titles besides that, again, is the Master of Heavenly Prayers, because he's said to receive the prayers and transmit them up. He's also thought of to be the choir director, which I again mentioned, but he has other tasks. Some of his tasks are simply receiving messages from above, from the Metatron. Sandalphon can't be found, again, as I was saying, in anything that's written in the Bible or in any of the cryptic books. His story can only be found really in the book of the Chariot. So as he became very popular in the mystical times in the Talmud, his famousness, he is, try it again. He is famous among the mysteries of heavenly halls and understanding the divine chariot of Ezekiel that has remained hidden for centuries. His nature is said to be that of a fierce fire. He keeps his place near God, but he spends much time here. But again, we have to understand God is everywhere. So he's not something that's easily seen as being here, there, or anywhere. And according to many, that seventh heaven is, again, closer to God, but it's also close to us. Other special powers were said to have been entrusted to him. He's been given the place over all of mankind. He's the special angel over the month of Adar. Remember, Adar is the month of Purim. Adar is the month when Israel survived a almost cataclysmic event. So he is a prayer angel. He's a defender. He's many things. One of the great rabbis in the Middle Ages, his name was Moses Cordovero, wrote a book, and it's called the Haklot. The word Haklot means palaces. So he wrote the story about palaces, and Sandalphon is the character that he was referring to when he talks about the fact of how Moses and Elijah found themselves clothed in clouds and were able for the first time to meet the character we call God, which also could be known as Havayah. Now, in the book of Exodus, chapter 24, verse 18, it says, when Moses went up into the clouds and he climbed to the top of the mountain, it is interpreted that he went into the cloud as if he was putting on that cloud as a garment. Once he's wrapped in the cloud, he was able to approach the fire and was able to get close to it. Similarly, with Elijah, he too went up, but there again, it says he went up in a whirlwind. And that's in the book of Kings, 2 Kings 2 and 11. And in Jewish understanding, the highest of heavens cannot tolerate any physical object from this world at all, not even a mustard seed. So we need to understand that no physical object can exist in a purest, holiest spiritual universe, which is why the angels argued that Moses shouldn't ascend to receive the Torah on Mount Sinai, because remember, God came down on the mountain and the mountain became so holy that mankind should not have gotten there. But again, in Shabbat 88b, it says, what is a human doing amongst us? That's the angel's understanding. But anyway, Elijah entered the whirlwind, but how was he able to ascend to meet, how was he able to ascend, you might ask? Well, he entered the whirlwind, clothed in himself, in what he was wearing. But when in this whirlwind, he was able to ascend. Now, this mystical story happens. Well, there's another book that you can't get except you can go online and read it. It's called the Book of Adam and Eve. It's also called the Book of Adam and Eve and Hasatan, Satan, or the conflict of Adam and Eve with Satan. And it was supposedly written several hundred years before Christ, and it deals with the time that Adam and Eve were in the garden. Now, the book is believed to be the work of an unknown Egyptian writer who first wrote the story in Arabic. And eventually the book found its way actually went further south. It went into Ethiopia, and an Ethiopian translated it from Arabic into the Ethiopic language. And pinning down the date of this whole thing it's impossible. But we can only say that it was written long before the turns of the coming of Christ. There's really nothing in the book of Adam and Eve that can be verified or corroborated. It is not a lost book like we would find in what we call the pseudogrypha. There was nothing in there that can help us understand those books. Now, in the future, according to the book, a certain ruach, a certain spirit, will descend to the world and will be clothed in the body upon earth. Now, Elijah will be his name. So we're going to say that there will be a period in time when this character will return. Now, in that very body that he left in, that is the body he will return in. And he right now has divested his body, and he's now living in what we would call the body of light. And he will be preparing himself, emanating or enabling him to become an angel when he's above, and on earth he can have a physical form. And when he wishes to descend to this world, he again puts on the clothing of a human. And that's the way it is. But in heaven, he wears a body of light. But if you go back to the book of Genesis, that was what Adam and Eve were originally clothed with, light. Now, Sandalphon's connection to Elijah the prophet is, fascinating, but it's also mysterious. Tradition says that Metatron's conversion was similar to that of Elijah. But the idea is that they were transmitted into Sandalphon it's rooted in a various mystical and midrashic traditions, particularly those dealing with the ascension and the angels into heaven. It's a metamorphosis. Now, we understand that according to Ezekiel, never dies, but went to heaven in the fiery chariot. This exceptional departure from the physical world has led to belief that Elijah was elevated to an angelic status, much like Enoch when he became Metatron. Elijah is one of the most prominent figures in Jewish eschatology. He's expected to announce the coming of the Messiah and settle unresolved legal and spiritual disputes. He's found in several books, or even in the Talmud, in the book called Eburim or Urvim 43b. Now, in some mystical traditions, Sandalphon's role is elevating prayers, which we talked about, and this is also involved in the Messianic function. He'll intercede when God chooses to settle here. So he is very much the intercessor. Elijah is often seen as a prophet who defended the Jewish people from false and spiritual corruption. That was the role of Sandalphon today. So we see the suggestion that the two are one. Now, many Kabbalistic and mystical books describe Elijah as appearing to be to them in a dream or visions, and often revealing hidden Torah insights. Sometimes it almost feels like if you're reading your Bible, something happens and all of a sudden the words are different and you gain a whole brand new meaning. Some would tell you that's Sandalphon. He's expressing to you or explaining to you something that you've been wondering about and something you need to know. Now, today, much of the world honors a character called Gaia, Mother Earth, as opposed to Sandalphon. In Jewish thought, he was seen as the guardian of the earth, as well as the guardian of all physicality. Sandalphon is the cosmic balance of Metatron and is often described as the twin angel. And so we see him over and over again. Unlike most angels, who are seen as, well, what are they seen as? Different from physicality, Sandalphon is uniquely linked to nature. Some traditions say that he governs the growth of trees and plants, aligning with the connection to Malkut. Literally, he causes the plants to grow. He's also associated with the color turquoise and earthly music, which ties his role back to being the leader of the angels. Now, there's certain things that Elijah and Sandalphon have that we need to look at. Elijah ascended to heaven alive. Sandalphon exists in the highest angelic realms. Elijah returned as the herald of the Messiah, or he will return. And he assists in the ascent of prayers, bridging worlds. Elijah intercedes for Israel. Sandalphon elevates and refines human prayer. Associated with fire is Elijah. And again, associated with fire and music and nature, well, that's Sandalphon. Sandalphon's connection to Elijah fits within the idea or the borders of what we call Kabbalistic understanding. This transformation is not unique. Kabbalah sees certain biblical figures as having undergone the spiritual ascent that grants them the role within the heavenly hierarchy. Sandalphon's function in Kabbalistic angelology, I couldn't hardly come that one, can be understood through a few key themes. Humans become angels. That's the elevated ones. Kabbalah teaches that a select few individuals, through righteousness and divine favor, can undergo a spiritual elevation, trending the human state and becoming angelic beings. Sandalphon is the transformed Elijah, and it's one of the most famous examples alongside Enoch, Metatron. In fact, there are four characters who have made that transition. We know of Enoch as Metatron, who has the job of being the lesser god. Elijah, who is Sandalphon, is the master of prayers and intercession and nature. But also we need to understand Moses is another one of those characters. In fact, he has a Hebrew name, Raziel. He's the keeper of divine secrets. And last that I know of. There's probably more, but I only know 4. That's Pincus. Pincus was the one who was the angel who stopped the death caused by the interactions of Jews with the Moabites on their trip back. He's just simply referred to as the angel of the covenant. He's called the defender of justice. Now, the transformation of humans into angels suggests the idea that, well, figures remain connected. Even though they're now angelic, there's still a connection to the earth. Just as Metatron is called the heavenly teacher guiding souls, Sandalphon remains closer to the physical realm, helping human beings. Sandalphon and the Sephiroth, he's the connection of the Malkut. Now that tree of life, which I showed you, the tree of life, Sandalphon is often associated with Malkut, the lowest of the Sephiroth. Malkut represents the Shekinah, the divine presence, the bridge between the spiritual and the material worlds. This places Sandalphon's role as an intermediary. In the mystical tradition, it describes him as being a seraph or a seraphim. Seraphim is the plural. A highest ranking angel associated with divine fire, as well as the twin of Metatron. Sandalphon and the Messianic era. That's an interesting one. You see, since Elijah is expected to return to herald the Messiah, Sandalphon's role may also include coming back or being a part of the Messianic age. Kabbalistic teachings suggest that during the end of days, the Shekinah, the divine presence, will fully reunite with the higher Sephiroth, restoring cosmic balance. And since Sandalphon is closely tied to Malkut, he could play a role in this whole restoration. There have been a lot of keys or a lot of clues that we've been talking about from Daniel and from all of the writings of Daniel and beyond. Something new has crossed my desk, and I'm working on it, and I'll share it with you in a few weeks. And that's the story of Jeremiah 25 and the story of the 70 weeks. The 70 weeks is only 2 verses out of that chapter, but the whole chapter is filled with understandings of the future, the whole of the future. So we'll go back and take a look at that and maybe review some of the other things we've talked about. Now, some theories suggest that just as Elijah returns to guide humanity from before the Messiah comes, Sandalphon's influence will become more and more pronounced. Increasingly, people will become more interested in the divine, and they will attempt to communicate and facilitate this redemption, this turning around. Now, as a reminder, Sandalphon is to be seen as a unique angelic force. He represents a rare blend of humanity and divinity. He's a prophet turned angel who still retains the deep connection to this earth. Now, unlike most angels who operate entirely in the celestial sphere, Sandalphon is deeply engaged in human prayer, nature, the material world. He embodies the divine presence within creation. Now, next week, I want to continue, but not with Sandalphon. I want to talk to you about Malach Mavet, the messenger of death. Understand, I'm talking about the messenger of death and not the angel of death. That'll come later. But that's where we're going to be going in the future. So I just wanted to give you an understanding of where things are headed.